Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and salam Malaysia Madani. Yang berbahagia Tuan Haji Nik Muhammad Yusof Nik, Advisor Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi FEM. Yang berbahagia Tuan Haji Muhammad Subri Abdullah, Co-Founder FEM. Yang berbahagia Profesor Datuk Dr. Saadiah Muhammad, Chairman FEM and Director Humane Economy Global Discourse HEGD 2026. Our esteemed collaborating partners from Majlis Agama Islam Wilayah Persekutuan, Yayasan Pembangunan Ekonomi Islam Malaysia and Yayasan Hasanah. Our venue partner, World Trade Center Kuala Lumpur. Our strategic partners, Perbadanan Perpustakaan Awam Selangor, Universiti Selangor, Oxford Intellect, Fibernetics Group Sdn Bhd, Global Peace Mission Malaysia, Ikim.fm, and Inisiatif Buku Darul Ihsan. Our distinguished speakers, moderators, and participants of HEGD 2026, Secretariat of HEGD 2026, distinguished guests, respected professors, representatives of government agencies, business leaders, civil society leaders, our young leaders and students, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Humane Economy Global Discourse HEGD 2026. My name is Zamir Asfar and I'm honored to be part of this event as your Master of Ceremonies. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, HEGD 2026 is convened under the theme Reclaiming Humanity for Shared Prosperity or Mengangkat Kemanusiaan Demi Kemakmuran Sejagat. Since its inception as an online discourse in 2021, HEGD has grown into Malaysia-led international platform, bringing together leaders from government, business, academia, and civil society to shape a more humane and sustainable future. Please join me in commending our dedicated organizer, Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi FEM, collaborators and partners for making HEGD 2026 possible. A warm round of applause, please. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to officially commence the Humane Economy Global Discourse 2026, it is my pleasure to invite Tuan Haji Nik Muhammad Yusof Nik Ismail, Chairman FEM, to deliver the welcome address, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam hormat, selamat pagi. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa man walah. Distinguished speakers, honored panelists, esteemed guests and friends. On behalf of FEM, Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of us, all of you, to the Humane Economy Global Discourse 2026. We are deeply grateful to our collaborating institutions, Mawid, Yapim, Yayasan Hasanah, knowledge partners supporting organizations who have contributed towards making this important gathering possible. May Allah bless our sincere effort and good intention to grant us our meaningful deliberations over these 2 days. The theme reclaiming humanity is both timely and prosperity should not be measured just by the creation of wealth, but by life enriched, communities strengthened, opportunities expanded, and the environment entrusted, especially for the future generations, our young ones behind us in this room. Our team invites us to rethink, besides to reclaim what it truly means to be being human. Being human. We are not just human beings, but what more, being human, i.e., to uphold dignity, nurture relationships, live with purpose and full of responsibility as stewardship. It was with this conviction that Professor Dr. Sadia and I, as co-founder of FEM, Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi, and we believe that then, as we do today, that the economy should exist to serve humanity rather than humanity serving the economy. The establishment of FEM was officially launched by Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, then the Member of Parliament for Port Dickson, reflecting the growing recognition that development must be guided not only by economic efficiency, but also by values, ethics, and human dignity. I think Professor Sadia can still concur with me that during the launching session, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, if I could recall correctly, said to us like this. He said, well, it is not that they have taken the mission to reclaim human dignity in the economic world. Well, we take it as a challenge. And we hope our young ones in the room will share with us and be our co-partners. Well, to cut short my speech, since we are late about 8 minutes, I would like to say that I, on behalf of the organizer, would like to invite all participants to engage openly, listen respectfully, challenge ideas constructively, and work together in the spirit of wisdom, collaboration, and mutual learning. may this discourse not only enrich our understanding, but also inspire meaningful partnerships and practical action beyond this conference. My last two remarks is this. One, at 75, I think I'm the youngest in the room. So please, make it something that is wise. And I think it is something nice to be the youngest in the room. Number two, I think don't just leave the economy to the economists. We need all diversity of ideas from people across professions to deal with our economy. And well, I think we need a strong political will. Put it in a better way, we need a strong statesman's will, because we need more statesmen rather than just mere politicians in Malaysia in order to move forward into the next future generation. And then if for some discussion that you think that political will is not as strong as statesman's will, then during lunch we'll discuss on this. I wish all of you a fruitful and inspiring Humane Economy Global Discourse 2026 for these 2 days. InsyaAllah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan terima kasih. Terima kasih.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you Tuan Haji Nik Muhammad Yusof for the welcome address and for setting the tone of HEGD 2026. Ladies and gentlemen, let us embark on our learning journey with our first speaking session on foundational keynote address, the role of economic maqasid in reclaiming humanity for shared prosperity. But before that, ladies and gentlemen, should you wish to pose a question to our speakers, kindly submit it via the QR code that will be displayed during each session. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome the esteemed speaker, Professor Yasir Alda, founder and chairman, Maqasid Institute, Canada. And to facilitate the later Q&A session, please join me to also welcome Professor Dr. Saadiah Muhammad, chairman, FEM, and director, HEGD 2026, onto the stage. Please welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, the role of economic maqasid in reclaiming humanity for shared prosperity. The floor is now yours, Prof.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good morning, everyone. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم رسوله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. First of all, I am really pleased and honored to speak today in this forum, and I really appreciate the invite. As our Ustad Haji Muhammad Yusuf mentioned, let's not leave the economy for the economists and let's bring other people to speak. So I appreciate his organization and Prof. Saadiah, Dr. Saadiah, and the organizing committee and the guests, and after all due appreciation and respect. So you bring in someone to speak from the Islamic law perspective. And I'm hoping that I bring a purely Islamic law perspective, a Sharia approach to this topic, very important topic, that is a genuine approach, I am hoping, and that is not trying to justify a status quo that is against the Sharia, but rather trying to propose ideas that are hopefully closer to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends from us and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from this ummah. I'm very happy to see the Reclaiming Humanity slogan for this conference, because it is very important at this stage to think in terms of humanity rather than in terms of hegemonic systems. And let me start with a premise that the current capitalist system as we live it today is antithetical and incompatible and non-compliant with humanity and with the Sharia. And this is based on everything that has developed over the past 100 years, particularly in that system, from the idea of fiat money, printing nice papers or plastic and giving it value with the power of the state or with the convention of a society, through the idea of the separation of the economic matters from the welfare of people, from the welfare of humanity. Whether we talk about economic matters in an educational sense or a medical sense, or talking about society, talking about arts, talking about civilization, how separate it is actually from the economic world, all the way to creating a science that is also separate from its epistemological basis and its to societies, to its manifestations in institutions and banks and companies and all of that. Islam does not endorse a currency that does not have a value. And it's not my topic, but it's just the premise that I will build my topic on, which is how can we reclaim humanity? So basically, the convention of having a piece of paper that has a value, that piece of paper must represent something. We call it in the Sharia a proper sak or a check. The word sak became check in European languages. That has to do with a promise to pay a particular commodity to the holder of that check. But the holder of that check is not supposed to suffer the depreciation of the value of that check while he or she did not do anything. So whenever the feds in the United States presses a button and makes a decision to print money, who pays for this money? Everyone who has a dollar in their pocket or in their bank account. And over the past 100 years, the dollar lost more than 90% of its value because of that. And that in Islam is called bakhs. Take the value down without right. And that value down without right goes up for other people. It does not go down for everyone. And that going up in value for riba, translated as usury in English, is from the Arabic word yarbu is something to enlarge, something to increase. Something to increase without justification is riba. And when the Prophet ﷺ told the companion, you cannot give 1 dinar and take 2 dinars, that is riba. It is by analogy that taking 2 dinars without even giving 1 dinar is also riba. Is creating 2 dinars out of nothing, as we have it in the current system. So from the core of the system and how the central banks create this money and like lend it to the branch banks, and how the branch bank and the cycle, and how the people who are at the higher levels of the economy use this currency with its value before the value goes around and depreciates, and how the system is functioning, that is to come from an Islamic perspective and to reclaim humanity, is actually a system incompatible with the Sharia. The Sharia does not separate between the rules and humanity, does not separate between what you should or should not do and what benefits or harms. They call it in this science maqasid al-Sharia, or the general objectives or purposes of the Sharia. In terms of humanity, it is the preservation of faith, preservation of mind, preservation of progeny, family, the preservation of souls and health and life, etc. The preservation of human welfare is not separate from the rules of the Sharia. So when the rules of the Sharia judge that riba, or this unjustified increase, is haram or is unlawful, it actually is basing that on the fact that this increase is going to harm humanity. It is preventing the harm and promoting the benefit of humanity. But let us be realistic. Strategically speaking, we cannot claim humanity by saying that the whole system is wrong and therefore isolating from the whole system. I've seen communities around the world, Muslim communities, who have a similar view on the system, but they end up isolating themselves. Take Muslims in India, for example, for the large part, and at some point I was part of the Indian Fiqh Council, and it was a dilemma to deal with a community because the system is ribawi, is haram. It's isolating itself to the extent of being at the bottom of the society economically, talking about Indian Muslims for the large part. And therefore, it is necessary that we work in 3 lines, in my perspective. One line from within the system, one line on the margins of the system, and a 3rd line outside the system, against the system. Working within the system is not un-Islamic. We read in the Quran the story of the believer of the house of Pharaoh, who worked from within the house of Pharaoh to prevent the assassination of Musa, alayhi salatu wassalam, and to try to do good as much as possible. We read about Yusuf, alayhi salam, who was a prophet who worked within an idolatry system, but trying to increase the benefit as much as possible. So one of the lines that we need to develop is how to work from within the system that is a haram system, actually, if we look at it honestly, but how to at least avoid as much damage as possible and increase as much benefit as possible. And this is something that especially politicians would be aware of, because many of them have ideals that are very different from our political realities, but they work within the system in order to maximize the benefits and minimize the harm. Yet, this first line should not be the only strategy. If it is the only strategy, the system will absorb us. The ribawi system or the usury system upon which capitalism is based is not going to allow us to do much from within the system. A little bit of Rawlsian social justice, a little bit of Keynesian dealing with crisis, it's not going to have an Islamic impact that all of us, Muslims and non-Muslims who are looking for humanity's sake, would be pleased with. And therefore, we have to think in a second line, which is working on the margin of the system, hoping to bring some change. I think that this is where the Islamic finances is. It is, by and large, more than 90% of it, and I would say more, is a hiyal, what we call in the Sharia hila, or the legal tricks. It is riba to sell 100 for 120. You are actually selling money. And I'm going to the bank and taking 100 from them in order to buy the car. They give the car dealer 100, and I pay the bank 120. This is 100 for 120, and there is a car in between. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu witnessed a similar event. He said, well, this is 1 dinar for 2 dinars, but there is a piece of silk in between. Buy me the silk, take the silk back. They call it tawarruq sometimes, they call it murabaha, tawarruq munazzam, munazzam, murabaha, etc. Like there are a number of names, but at the end, it is a legal trick. It's a circumvention around the riba. But at the core of it, and if you ask a maqasid sharia guy like myself, I will tell you it's riba. The problem is that this system was the only possible way to deal with capitalism back maybe 50 years ago or so. And at a time when Islamic movements really needed that kind of support from the capitalist system, but without really doing pure riba. And therefore, I believe from the beginning, from the Islamic Bank of Dubai to the bank in Saudi Arabia, Faisal, etc., all the experiments that we had, I believe that they were very useful. I think now, by and large, the Islamic finance is just creating more millionaires and is not really supporting the Islamic movement and the Islamic organizations as much as it should. And yes, there is some that is still being supported, but I would say that it is not exactly how that system was built. So working on the margin of the system is good, and for the simple people, yes, fine, sure, there is a way of circumventing riba, so I have the same contract, but it doesn't say interest, it says something else. And there is some 7-8% of real tijara, what the Quran calls tijara or bay'a, 7-8% of trade. That's in the qirad or in the mudaraba. There are some real trade here happening, but a minority, the majority is not. But it is about time that we move from the second strategy of basically on the margin of the system to being outside the system, to going back to the Islamic economy, how the Islamic economy works. First of all, the Islamic economy is not separate from the Islamic society and the Islamic faith and the Islam. It's not a separate discipline. But let me outline 3 pillars in the time allowed. A pillar that's called awqaf, and a pillar that's called zakah, and a third that's called bay'a. Awqaf in Arabic is endowments in English, charity endowments. It started with Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam when he went to Medina and he bought a piece of land to build the mosque on it. The mosque of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, still in Medina, is the first waqf in Islam, the first endowment. Why? Because the mosque should not be owned by anybody, should not be a part of the trade or the tijara in the society. The mosque is a sanctuary. I see outside here, as I come to the hall, donate for the waqf of the musalla or the prayer room in this building. And this is exactly what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. But mosque was not the only sanctuary. Umar radiallahu anhu became Amir al-Mu'mineen after Umar, the Khalifa, came to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and told him, I have a garden that I would like to donate. So he told him a Quranic word. He said, sabbilha. Sabbilha in Arabic is a verb from give it fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah. Make it for the sake of Allah. At-tasbil is the original term of what we call waqf or habs afterwards and so on in the fiqh classics. But it's called tasbil. Why? Because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is referring to the Quran. Put it for the way of Allah. But then he explained, he said, لا تباع ولا تشترى ولا تورث. It is not going to be sold anymore and nobody will purchase it and you will never inherit it to others. Who owns the waqf? Who owned that garden of Umar? And then many other gardens, Mukhayriq, others in Medina. Who own it? Allah. And the legal system accommodates that, makes the owner of the waqf Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saw a phenomena in Medina that the Jews of Medina are selling water. They dug a well, very big well, and they are selling water and monopolizing water in Medina. So he wanted to free the residents of Medina from that monopoly. So he said, who gives this well fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah? Uthman radiallahu anhu made another waqf, another endowment. So he bought the well, but Uthman did not own the well, did not sell the water. In fact, water is not sellable in Islam. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned there are three things that are not sellable. Al-kala'u wal-ma'u wal-nar. Grass, like wild grass, is not sellable. You can collect it and sell your effort in collecting it, but nobody owns it. Nobody owns nature, forests. Nobody owns that. And nobody owns water, and nobody owns fire. And this is something that could develop in the Islamic economics in a way that is very interesting, very different from the capitalist system. But Uthman then bought the well of water and made it available for the whole Medina. That is an endowment. Khalid radiallahu anhu ibn al-Walid, the great warrior who defeated the Roman Empire in the year 15 Hijri, Khalid made another waqf, another endowment. He put all his armors and all his swords as a waqf. Nobody would own them after him. They would be used by the army as an endowment. And then every companion, we have it in the hadith, every companion made a waqf. There was a very interesting waqf, not just for the poor. Umar made the garden for his poor relatives, and Khalid made it for the army, and Uthman made it also for the public. But then there were awqaf that were not made for the poor people, but made for the society. Rufayda, the female companion, made the first waqf of a hospital because she built a tent in the masjid, and that tent was for anyone who got injured in the wars or who wants to see a physician. And Rufayda was a surgeon and was a physician of the time. And that tent was not for business. And people who came to the tent did not pay. And if they need anything, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would call for the companions, bring the medicine that your brother needs. Go and get what they need in order to deal with their surgeries. And that developed into something in the Islamic civilization that were called al-mashafi in Arabic, bimaristan in Persian, which has to do with hospitals being awqaf. And that is when the waqf starts to get very interesting and again very antithetical to the capitalist system. The health system in Islam is not a business, it's a right. And therefore, the donations of people built hospitals or built endowments that spend on hospitals And being medicated is a right for everyone, Muslim, non-Muslim. This is not something religious only for Muslims. It's something that we had in the Islamic civilization. Read about the history of the hospitals, the endowment hospitals in Carthage, in Tunis, in Iraq, in India, in Turkey. I grew up in Cairo. Most of the hospitals in Cairo, as I grew up back in the 60s and 70s of the previous century, were actually awqaf. You go to the waqf, you pay a very nominal fee, and the donations take care of you. Now Cairo doesn't have one or two awqaf hospitals, and they are shutting down because the capitalist system ate the health system that we inherited until 50 years ago. The capitalist system trades in people's life and death. Look at what's happening in the United States as a very big example of how trading in health is unfair and is inhumane. And no matter how you try to solve it, but if the hospitals are all endowed, the rich people, I'm going to say where you get the money from, endow hospitals, and the hospitals are going to take care of the health of the society, because we don't trade in Islam in medicine this way. Yeah, you could manufacture medicine and sell it, but the whole system of international agreements and intellectual property and all of that, these tools that come at the heart of the capitalist system, are not Islamic. And if you ask me, are haram, if you want a fatwa for it. But it is the status quo now. To change the status quo is to create hospitals that are not part of the tijara, the business. But you need research. Well, this is another endowment. Bayt al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, and then the houses of wisdom everywhere in the Muslim civilization, were the research centers that researched medicine and astronomy and chemistry, that researched about animals and food. The research in the Muslim perspective and in the Islamic paradigm is not a business as well, and is not protected. Ideas are not protected. People who manufacture anything now, why don't they pay people in the past? Why don't they pay Jabir ibn Hayyan for creating algebra, and Khwarizmi for creating algorithms, and Newton for creating the equations of gravity? Why do they pay only the creators of what they create today? Anyway, but the research centers are free from the markets, and therefore the Islamic paradigm deals with research and knowledge as a sanctuary, similar to the sanctuary of the mosque, as an endowment. Bayt al-Hikmah, Buyut al-Kutub, the libraries in the Islamic civilization, were not trading in books. They were actually for free. They were donations as well. And the major libraries that we had inherited and that the Renaissance eventually built on it is actually something that is part of that system of the endowment, awqaf system. You're talking about markets being awqaf. There is a waqf that allows people to trade without credit, as we say, without credit, and therefore they could come and have a loan from the waqf and trade. And trading without credit, again, is antithetical to the capitalist system, but this is what the awqaf are proposing here, al-suq or al-khana. That is the system. Now, the sanctuaries of nature, the animals, the birds, the forests, the clearing of the water, all of this was taken care by al-awqaf. As-zakah, and I wouldn't have time to detail, was another arm of the Islamic economics that deals with emergencies of poverty or debt or refugees or freeing the slaves in the old times and the current fatwas, freeing nations from occupation and all of that. So the third is al-bay' or trade. People could trade, but they do not trade in health. They do not trade in education. Universities were awqaf, and they were not part of the business system. They were not tied to the markets. And that is a major problem that we have as professor, I would tell you that being tied to the market, whether in the management of education or in the delivery of knowledge, is quite problematic, because sometimes the knowledge that you would like to teach students is opposite of what the market wants, but this is what they should learn in order to be learned people and to be literate, etc. So trade, al-bay' in that sense, should be goods for goods or goods for wealth, but not trading in money. And al-bay' comes with a culture of awqaf, a culture of depending on the rizq of Allah, the rizq or the providence of Allah. As long as you have providence from Allah for yourself and your kids and the kids of the kids, why do you hoard money? The Quran is very strong against holding money. And therefore, it is part of the tradition to give 1/3 of your wealth to the awqaf. And that is how the economy grew. If we give not just 1/3, if we give 2.5%, which is supposedly the zakah, there will be no poverty, and there will be enough for humanity, and education for humanity, and research for humanity. Just 2.5%, let alone allowing 1/3. But we need to work on the policies. We need to shape the culture. Instead of shaping the culture towards capitalism, we shape the culture towards the Islamic ideals. If we are serious about that, if there is a political will, as our Ustad talked about. And it is very important that we create the policies and the law. I'm noticing here there's contradictions between the laws of awqaf on the state level versus the federal level, and there are many complications and problems that we need to clear and deal with, so that the awqaf go back to being the backbone of the Islamic economy. This is how we can reclaim humanity. We are not going to be able to reclaim humanity from within the system, I would say, but working outside the system and in parallel to the system until we overwhelm the system, hopefully, one day, especially as a Western citizen, I would say, especially with the decline of Western civilization, it is important that we take note of these Islamic instruments and premises. And again, thank you so much for inviting me. I hope that these opinions would be useful, and all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair, Professor Jasser Adar. You have raised some profound questions, and as we convene here today at a Humane Economy Global Discourse, we do talk about rethinking and reimagining our economy. And we have some Islamic finance experts and economists and businesses, and now Professor Jasser Adar's his question is, should we have business in education? Should we have business in water and in medical? So these are some of the questions. And I like the fact that we were talking about the role of awqaf, which is a massive potential and if we are to bring the human economy. And that we have so much progress to have that take off the ground, yeah. But let's look at the questions. You are encouraged to ask questions through that. And about the first question: if the ultimate objective of the Sharia is the protection and flourishing of human dignity, and that is karama insania, should contemporary Islamic economics move beyond wealth creation and toward building a truly human-centered economy? Like, should we move away from wealth?
Yeah. I think we should work in parallel. Wealth creation is still important as long as the system is corrupt. I am aware, as someone who lives in the West, I am aware of the importance of wealth creation, because, without wealth creation that we have in the West from Muslims and from sincere people, we would have a much worse status quo in the Muslim world. There is a lot of evasion of disasters that happens because of the wealth creation in the West. Yet, wealth creation should not be the objective. The objective should be the people of a truly Islamic economy. If we want to move towards that, we should put the people's welfare at the center of our economy. And of course, this would be a major fight, but that's basically what ideally we should be doing.
Do you have maybe one more question? Yeah, okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you, sir.
Do you have a mic? Could you give a mic?
We have an industry, and I think that's where capitalism comes in. Of course, in a very skewed way now, but I think that's what it is. So, could you elaborate about how jobs, employment relates to Islamic economy the way you want it? Thank you.
Well, in the Islamic economy, jobs are jobs. People work. People work as doctors and engineers and teachers, and they work. But what we are talking about is not jobs. We're talking about growth. The problem is growth, not jobs. Whether the hospital is owned by someone or the hospital is owned by Allah and it's a sanctuary, the doctors work there and the nurses, and people make money when they work. But the problem is linking this to the myth of growth or the necessity of growth without a reason. At the end, the growth ideology is antithetic to what Islam is teaching, if you look at the outcome of it. Because money is not really trickling down, money is going up. The growth is actually serving the 1% and those who are revolving around the 1%. At the end, with all of this growth in economies over the past 100 years, humanity lives a lesser quality of life. And when humanity tries to say no, as the people of Gaza tried to do, they slaughter them. I believe that what's happening in Gaza is a fight against capitalism. It's not really occupation and nation liberation and all of that. It's a fight between Islam and capitalism. That's how I see it. And when people reject the idea that they should be enslaved by the bigger system starts to create the weapons factories and start to deal with the problem. So creating jobs is the same, whether the majority of the economy is awqaf or whether the majority of the economy is trade and banks and all of that. It's the same economy. But there is a humane economy versus an inhumane economy, versus an economy that doesn't care about people's welfare. But we're talking about an economy that has the same institutions, but the ultimate goal is the human, not the rich people. Allah.
Okay, we have one question there, and then also I think Professor Mahindran would like to have a question as well. But let's do that. What role should universities play in cultivating future economists and policymakers who can translate maqasid into real economic reforms? But maybe we can have that as well, and you could answer it together.
No, I forget.
Oh, you forget. Okay, answer that.
Yeah, well, universities are very important because, obviously, in order to create the research that we need and the institutions that we need. And the institutions cannot be built without education of people who are going to work in these institutions. Right now, we are making employees who are nice employees in the system, but are not working in the right system. We are not creating the right graduate who is going to work in the human-centered system, where the specialization is shrinking more and more and more. And now education for a particular company, just to get a certificate to work in a company, that's all you know in the world. Now it's becoming a very popular idea. And that is suicide for knowledge and for humanity, versus creating a graduate who can work in different places. And if he cannot work in this company or this technology, he changes and works in a different technology, or she. That's different. So universities are crucial, and endowing them is very important so that at least we start to give scholarships for good students and all of that, and not make the education system slave to the capitalist system.
Yeah, one short question, Professor Hinman.
I think, thank you very much for the interesting perspective. I think you started off with economics. We are in this mess. If you ask who's to blame, actually all the business schools. I'll tell you why. Because we tell our students, go out and maximize profits. Return on investment is very important. Shareholder value is very important. But actually they missed an important literature in the economics called value proposition. And this brings back from an ROI to a return on values, ROV. What it shows is that in economic development, we talk about land, labor, capital, and productivity. But where is nature? Where are the people in your movement that we are making, which is how do we go back to return on values, which talks about, number one, the environment. If we don't have the environment, nothing else matters, right? How do we bring environment? This is where planetary health and sustainable development is very important. Number two is actually about society, because they are our consumers, they are our markets. Number three is the last two is very important, which is actually about political stewardship, will, and empowerment. These are intangibles, but can be tangibilized. If you don't have the first three, the economy suffers. So how do we capture those values? And increasingly, we are starting to see that is important. We can capture that. And I think we have to talk the language for the corporate sector on return on values. Increasing empirical evidence is showing that if you are able to generate return on values, your return on investment increases. You bring in the right talent, you bring in the right investments, and so on. So I think it is aligned to the Maqasid al-Sharia, but maybe the language should be return on values.
I totally agree, Prof. I totally agree. Thank you very much. This is the way ahead. It is very important that we change the values and restructure the culture around the idea of rizq, providence, providence of health and good environment. And what you're talking about is antithetical to the growth dogma, because growth is ruining the environment. The lamps here are going to expire and be changed because there is an expiry date on them. But the first lamp that Edison created still on in California after all these years. So we are inserting an expiry date and inserting a culture of throwing stuff away in order to renew, in order for the machine to continue to run and growth to continue to happen. Even though we could create much less things that will cost the earth much less. The cost here is paid by the earth, really. The cost of all of this is paid by the earth. So I really appreciate your input. Thank you.
Professor Jasser, on behalf of Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi and everyone gathered here, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, your scholarship, and your vision with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in giving a warm round of applause to Professor Jasser. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yasir, for insightful sharing. Please welcome Professor Yasir and Professor Dr. Sadia to stand forward for a photo opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, a truly human economy begins when economic progress is guided by Maqasid values, placing human dignity, justice, and shared prosperity at the heart of every decision. Once again, let us give a round of applause to Professor Yasir as well as to Professor Dr. Sadia. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, before we introduce the speakers for our next session, I would like to share an important announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform and remind all participants that the attendance registration is required for every session, especially during the breakout sessions. Please register your attendance at the registration counters outside Tun Hussein on Hall A, Tun Hussein on Hall B, or at the Kedah Johor Room by presenting the QR code at the back of your name tag. If you have not yet registered for this morning sessions, please do so at your earliest convenience. Having said that, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., we will be having our first breakout sessions across 3 parallel tracks. Here in this hall, we will continue with track 1, Youth Forum. Across the hall in the Kedah Johor room, track 2, Business and Finance Forum will take place. Meanwhile, next door in Tun Hussein On Hall B will be track 3, Community and Social Impact Forum will be held. All participants are welcome to join whichever track best matches your interests and scan the QR code upon entering respective tracks. Once again, the first breakout session will begin at 11 a.m. and please register your attendance before joining the session. And then after that, at 2 p.m., after the lunch break, we will reconvene for the second breakout session featuring 2 exciting parallel sessions. Here in this hall, don't miss the plenary HEGD conversation on Humane Economy in Action. Alternatively, you may head to next door Tun Hussein On Hall B for the HEGD Ideas Lab. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on with our program, we shall now proceed with our high-level plenary leadership dialogue titled One Economy, Across Society. Without further delay, join me to welcome the distinguished moderator for this session, Professor Muhammad Aslam Muhammad Hanif, Deputy Director, Research, Innovation and Development, International Islamic University, Malaysia. Next, please welcome our esteemed speakers, Tuan Haji Muhammad Azmi Abdul Hamid, Chairman Majlis Perundingan Pertubuhan Islam Malaysia MAPIM, Professor Mahindra Nair, Prof. Vice Chancellor, Research and Sustainability, Sunway University, Dr. Imran Alvi, CEO, Oxford Intellect UK, who will be joining us virtually, and Meenakshi Rahman, Deputy Executive Director, Third World Network and Head of Climate Change Program. Ladies and gentlemen, one economy, many voices, rebuilding trust across society. Prof. Aslam, please take us through.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and a very good morning to everyone. Usually in a conference or in a symposium, after the keynote address, we have the first plenary session. And from what I usually, we look at the first plenary session as the session that will put the agenda for the remaining 1.5 days or 2 days. Yeah? So I look at this plenary session, which is also called the high-level plenary session, as something that is supposed to do just that. After hearing Professor Jasser's views, and let me just say that, I agree with a lot of what he said, although I don't think economists should be blamed for all the problems in the world. The business people, I think, Prof, the business, there's a big difference between business people and economists. Yeah? We get the blame for a lot of things that go wrong, things that are done by the bankers and the business people. Yeah? But I'm sure he will agree, even when we are talking about the role of maqasid, just as this plenary session is supposed to highlight, there are many, many voices. And the purpose of this plenary session is to talk about these many voices. While we live in one global capitalist system, the one economy, as the panel theme is putting, the human experience within it is vastly diverse. True shared prosperity is only possible when we acknowledge, respect, and integrate plurality into the discourse. Embracing this plurality is not just an exercise in inclusion. It is a remedy for a deeply fractured world, a world facing profound global trust deficit. When the dominant economic system consistently leaves communities behind, when the voices of the vulnerable are sidelined in favor of pure profit, people lose faith in institutions, and nations lose faith in global frameworks. And therefore, rebuilding trust is central to our goal. It requires dialogue that goes beyond mere toleration of other voices, but one that actively centers them in the decision-making process. Genuine dialogue, if we can use this term, genuine dialogue that is based on respect and understanding. Now, to help us navigate exactly how we bridge these divides and rebuild that essential trust, we have assembled a panel that embodies this plurality that we need. In order to save time, and I was just asking the organizers, it was 75 minutes, and I'm wondering if we have still to stop at 11, and please give me the cue as we go along. I will try to just introduce immediately the panelists. I believe we have one panelist online. Do we have a panelist online? Yeah. So we have 4 panelists. Our first panelist, Tuan Haji Muhammad Azmi bin Abdul Hamid, President of MAPIM, Majlis Perundingan Pertubuhan Islam Malaysia. I believe it's a good indication of dialogue within, internal dialogue between various Muslim organizations. Is well placed to discuss the relationship between the voices of the grassroots and social justice. Our second panelist is well placed to talk about the voice of sustainable innovation and policy, Professor Mahindra Nair, Pro Vice Chancellor of Research and Sustainability at Sanya University. Our third panelist online brings the voice of global institutional strategy, Dr. Imran Alvi, CEO of Oxford Intellect, who will be talking about how we can make a difference globally, something that is a big challenge, I think, to the global south. And our fourth panelist, Meenakshi Raman, Deputy Executive Director of the Third World Network, brings the voice of climate justice and the global south. I think with these a few words of introduction to the speakers and to what the panel hopes to get, a few words about the panel. We will give each panelist 8 minutes to make your initial intervention. If we have the time, we will have further intervention from moderator. If not, I will go straight to the audience for Q&A after the presentations. So with that, can I please invite Tuan Haji to please make your intervention. You could either present from there or you could come here. It's
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the organizer, thank you for inviting me. It is a very difficult thing to speak only 8 minutes, but let's try. Now this theme, the one economy, many voices, rebuilding the trust across society. This is a very defining crisis of our time. I agree that we are actually facing a deep erosion of trust. Citizens are increasingly distrust the governments, workers distrust cooperation, communities distrust development projects, young people distrust a future that appears more expensive the poor distrust system that repeatedly promise inclusion while continuing to produce exclusion. And across societies, people are asking a very, very fundamental question. Who is the economy really for? Now, this is not a rhetorical question. It is a question of justice, legitimacy, and leadership. An economy cannot be considered successful simply because gross domestic products rises, stock markets expands, or corporate profits increase. It is true success must also be measured by whether families can live with dignity, whether workers receive fair wages, whether children have access to education, whether people can afford health care, whether communities are protected from displacement, or whether future generations inherit a livable planet. Now, the central challenge before us, therefore, is not simply how to grow the economy. The deeper challenge is how to humanize economy. Now, we often speak of global economy as though it were a single or integrated system. In one sense, this is true. Supply chains connect continents, capital moves across borders, technology links producers, consumers, and institutions. A decision made in one financial center can affect workers and families thousands of kilometers away. Yet the lived realities within this one economy remain deeply unequal. For some, the economy provides opportunities, security, and mobility. But for many others, and millions of others, it produces insecurity, debt, displacement, and exclusion. A worker may contribute to global supply chain, yet remain unable to afford decent housing. A farmer may produce food for society, yet remain trapped in poverty. A young graduate may possess qualifications, yet spend years in unstable employment. A refugee may possess skills and experience, yet remain excluded from formal economic life. A rural community may live on land rich in natural resources, yet receive little benefit from the development taking place around it. This is why one economy must listen to many voices. The economy does not belong only to markets, corporations, central banks, or ministries. It also belongs to the worker, the farmer, the mother, the youth, the elderly, the small entrepreneur, the person with disabilities, the displaced family, and the future generation. When economic policy is shaped only by a narrow circle of power, it becomes divided. When people are excluded from decisions that affect their lives, trust begins to collapse. Now, trust is not something of a value, but it's also an economic asset. Trust is often described as a moral and social value. To me, trust can be an economic asset. Without trust, people hesitate to invest, cooperate, participate, and innovate. Without trust, institutions become more expensive to operate because every transaction requires more control, surveillance, and enforcement. Without trust, citizens resist reforms, workers lose motivation, and communities become vulnerable to anger, divisions, and manipulation. Trust cannot be demanded, and it must be earned. Governments earn trust through transparency, fairness, and accountability. Corporations earn trust through ethical conduct, fair wages, responsible supply chains, and respect for communities. Financial institutions earn trust by serving society rather than exploiting vulnerability. Civil society earns trust by remaining principled, independent, and accountable. Leaders earn trust when their actions are consistent with their words. The crisis of trust is therefore not primarily a communication problem, it is a structural problem. People do not lose trust simply because institutions fail to explain themselves. They lose trust because they experience inequality, corruption, exclusion, broken promises, and double standards. Trust cannot be restored by slogans. It must be rebuilt through justice. Now, my final words is this. A humane economy begins with an essential principle. And what is the principle? Human beings must never be reduced to economic units. Workers are not merely labor costs. Communities are not obstacles to development. Nature is not an unlimited warehouse of resources. The poor are not failures. Refugees are not burdens. Young people are not statistics. Every person possesses dignity. A humane economy recognizes that markets are tools, not masters. Profit has a legitimate role, but profit cannot become the sole purpose of economic activity. Development has value, but development cannot destroy communities, cultures, and ecosystems. Technology creates progress, but technology cannot be allowed to deepen exclusion or remove human responsibility. Trade creates opportunity, but trade must be fair. Finance can stimulate growth, but finance must serve society. We must move away from extractive economy that takes from people and nature without restoring what it destroys. We need a regenerative economy that protects dignity, renews communities, and preserves ecological balance. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Tuan Haji. You have really set the standard benchmark now for the remaining three speakers because you did take 8 minutes. Wonderful. So maybe my life will be easy in this session, Prof. Okay, before I call the second speaker, just a little bit of background. I remember more than 2 years ago, the IIUM, we organized a conference, Prof. Sadia was there as well. The theme was sustainable humane economy. And for an Islamic economics conference, a lot of people were asking, why do you have this theme and not an Islamic theme? And we tried to explain, and we were happy to be able to convince the co-partners that this sustainable humane economy is very, very, very Islamic in terms of the content. So I'm very happy, Prof. Sadia, she organized this program that continues the discourse. And I think it's a discourse that we would like to see much more. And maybe something for you all to think about. Humanistic economics, humane economics, social market economy. Please think about these different terms because these were very important things to me when we were trying to develop the platform to talk about an alternative. Okay, so Tuan Haji, you set the tone by talking about the importance of human beings at the core of any development agenda. You talked about the fact that there is structural distrust in the system. And so now, Prof. Nair, the floor is yours. The technology that we're going to use, the AI and all these latest things that we're going to do, are we going to increase the marginalization of communities? Are we going to increase inequality?
Well, you're going to see that in my speech, in my talk. So thank you very much for setting the tone. First, salam sejahtera, selamat pagi. And let me thank the organizers for inviting me to this important forum, and particularly Sadia, and thank you very much. Let me start with the my PowerPoint presentation. So it's the theme of the conference is really apt because we are seeing, the global environment is rapidly changing, and we see that, while I think the speaker spoke about wealth increasing, we are also seeing a lot of gaps. And what is really concerning is that it is not just the bottom 40% that we talk about. The middle 40% are becoming, the bottom 80%, because technology is changing rapidly, and we are starting to see major structural changes in the labor market. In terms of poverty, we used to have, hardcore poverty. We are seeing relative poverty now increasing rapidly. Do we have the presentation?
We get extra time, don't worry.
I was just going to ask, do we, the football, have extra time here? Okay. Well, meanwhile, they set up, I think I'll continue. I think one of the things that was highlighted by the first speaker is actually about the economy that we inherited from, the primarily driven by the Western world is actually a zero-sum development model. We grow at the expense of the environment, the expense of people, because, as I said, business schools teach maximize profit, shareholder values, and sometimes we miss other values. Is there an alternate model which is more sustainable? So here it is that I'm going to show you what is a humane economy, I'm going to show you an example of how we see this a lot in many cities. We have urban cities, amazing cities, but we also see sprawling urban poverty. And how do we close that gap? And here I'm going to show you an example of where I am, where you have 2 kilometers apart, 2 ecosystems, but one common vision of shared prosperity. Everybody wants to do well, but they are in different contexts and different circumstances. Next. So, next. So we're going to see how urban poverty, because this is rapidly increasing because we are starting to see migration from rural areas, and we saw that in Malaysia, where you have rapid economic growth, but gaps are widening. And when we studied very carefully, we see that in many of these urban ecosystems, we see something called polycrisis, multiple factors that are contributing to this. Not that many people have not done things, they're going in and fixing things, but it's not having an impact because poverty is a multidimensional perspective. We need a more holistic perspective. So we're going to talk about the underserved communities. Are there an alternate model? And this is where the zero-sum development model has caused these gaps. And how do we address this? And are there opportunities to learn and develop? And I'll show you later on a video clip on how an example of that's done. Next. So we're seeing this. This is a study that we did in Malaysia in 2011, and we show the gaps that were forming at that time, and more recent study shows that the gaps are widening. We see urban poverty, we see fishing villages. We did a major study on the blue economy in Malaysia. We see a lot of coastal communities with rich resources. Poverty is still very high, and other challenges. So the gap is widening. And this, more recent study shows this. So how do we address this challenge? Next. I'm going to talk about a community where I live in. I'm not sure how many of you all know Desa Mentari. If you go on the federal highway, you'll be able to see high-rise buildings. A lot of this was a project that was done in the 80s to put people in high-rise buildings. Very noble idea. But we see that across Malaysia, you see that a lot of challenges that they face. A lot of multidimensional issues, equity, and a whole range of things. And what you'll see, a lot of PPRs have quite a lot of challenges. So how do we address this? How do we bring dignity and prosperity and modernity, and also the gaps that are widening? How do we close these gaps? Next. So here it is that where I live, we have a smart city, but 2 kilometers, we have major problems. You know, we have, they said, 10 blocks, close to 26,000 people, right? So this is where 2 kilometers apart, 2 ecosystems, you talk to them, they have the same vision of better education, better jobs, and so on. How do we close that gap? Next. So what are the challenges? This is what we picked up from our study. Major issues, crowded living, unhygienic living, you know, whole host of things. You know, youngsters dropping out of school, don't want to go to school, and so on. This is real challenge, right? How do we bring better life, style and quality of life? Next. So when we studied this very carefully, we realized that actually there is a massive poly crisis. Not one policy will solve this. It's context specific. So we see there are leadership and governance challenges. We don't know who manages that. We have issues of infrastructure that are not maintained really well. It goes on and on and on. So where do we start? What is it that we start? So people are going in and doing small things, but not making a dent. So we see that, you know, weak governance has a knock-on effect on poorly managed ecosystem, lack of education, and a whole host of places. And when we go down, we see that 3 generations living in a very small quarters, 3 generations, right? There's major social problems. When we talk to the communities there, they tell us that almost every month there is an attempted suicide or a successful suicide, right? This is a major challenge, right? So how do we address this issue? Next. So this is about trust and governance. So what we have done is we really need to have partnerships. As a university, I think somebody raised, universities are the place to start because that's where the young people are, the future leaders are. That's where you have innovation, R&D. So we assemble a team together. We say, how do we address these challenges? We brought in universities, part one, you know, wholesome approach, you know, one ecosystem approach, right, is needed here. And that is how we see that we started driving this change. Next. So before that, I want to show you a video clip, how we do it. Can you play the video? Right? So it's how do we do the how.
Hopefully it's a 2-minute video.
Yeah? Yes, it's a 2 minutes video. Only 2 minutes. Only 2 minutes. Can you?
Home to thousands of families. Resilience lives in every family. The laughter of children, the determination of parents, and each day to feel alive. Challenges remain: poverty, inequalities, and limited access to education. This is understood limitation. This is our potential waiting to be awakened. At Samri University, we ask. Adults, skills training, and lives, the dignity and gratitude to the universe evidence, one lesson, one level. And the explorer ranges explorating works, turns learning into discovery, curiosity, and joy. These are never just programs. They are pathways, pathways that remind every resident that the future is theirs to share. Change doesn't happen overnight, but with hearts and minds come together, transformation begins. This is not charity. This is not corporate social responsibility. It's a shared dream in partnership with energies. Sunday is an entire community development program, empowering lives, transforming communities, building futures.
So here it is that the 8R ecosystem approach applied, one university lifting up helping 26,000 people. We have 358 institutions across the country. If all of them focus on what the Makasid al-Sharia and others are doing, we can lift more than 1 million out of poverty and giving them that value-based prosperity development model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Al. Can I just say, on behalf of the IIUM, we have an MOU to sign after this program because we have similar projects. I'm sure UNICEF has similar projects going on. Universities are into this, and I think this is very important because we are bringing the youth involved in these programs. And really, these are the youngsters who have the energy and who have the motivation to do what you're talking about. So an ecosystem approach, I think it's very, very much needed. Our third speaker is online, Dr. Imran Alvi. Is he online? Yeah, okay, so if he is online, can I invite Dr. Imran Alvi to make his... It's a recorded video, okay, so if you could... I hope it was recorded like immediately. We have 8 minutes rather than 12 or 15 minutes. Okay, yeah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's an honor to be here, albeit through a recorded presentation. I apologize for not being able to be with you in person, but hope that I will benefit and be able to contribute something to the conference through this recorded presentation. Our theme for today is building trust across society. And this is a wide area of discussion, and I have limited time with you. So within the time we have together, I wish to share with you 3 themes which I believe will help to build trust within society under this broader discussion point of humane economy. The first point I'd like to share with you is that of language, the importance of language if we are to build trust within society. Language is something which is important for understanding. Without that understanding, trust is not going to be built. In terms of the language I'm appealing towards, it's not to say that we should as a society have a singular language, that everyone should speak Arabic or Malay or English. Rather, what I'm arguing for is a language which is transparent and allows society members to understand economic thinking and economic decision making. Because often the discourse around economy is wrapped in a language which it means it's no longer accessible to the common person, to the layman, the person who is not in the academic field of economics, to say. What are the adverse effects of this? Why is this a problem for building trust in society? 2 reasons. Firstly, without that understanding of why economic decision-making is taking place, what is the economic thinking behind it, we lead to a society which is anxious, which is unsure, and will therefore look for other sources to come to their conclusions. And this is very dangerous in terms of developing distrust in society. Let me give you a small example to illustrate the point. Imagine you enter a new country, you're at the immigration desk, the passport is in the hand of one immigration officer, and he's discussing your passport with another immigration officer. Now, their decision of whether you get entry to the country or not is important for you. You're there for a purpose, you have a travel itinerary in front of you, and you're keen you enter the country. But the discussion that the immigration officers are having is in a foreign language. What will happen? It doesn't lead to trust in your heart. It doesn't lead to you feeling involved in that decision-making process. Rather, anxiety starts to build up. Will I gain entry? Will I not gain entry? And in order to soothe that anxiety, in order to try and find out what is going on in that discussion, what happens is we look for other small clues. We might look for body language. We might look for a smile on a face, a frown on a face. Why? Because we're trying to understand the decision they're going to reach. We're trying to understand their thinking, but there's a barrier of language, and hence we're going for other smaller clues. In a similar fashion, when we're making economic decisions, the economic thinking behind those decisions, if it is not understood by society, they will go to other sources to try and understand the economic decision. That might be social media, it might be other sources, which often are not accurate. And this leads to deep distrust in society and at a very rapid pace. So the first point of having a language which is understood by everyone in terms of economic thinking is to ensure that the populace at large is informed of and fluent with the thinking behind our economic decisions in order to build trust. The second reason to have clarity in language is because if our language is opaque, if it's covered in academic terms which take it out of the realm of understanding of the populace, what we find is we open the door for bad economic decision making. We open a door where policymakers throughout society, I'm using policymakers in a general sense, it doesn't necessarily have to be government, are able to introduce policy which is not good for society at large, but cover it in a language which does not allow society to understand that decision. Let me give you one example from the UK. During the 2007-2008 financial crisis, what was introduced in the UK was called quantitative easing. And this term, and I'm saying this as an economist myself, is a term I had to look up to understand what exactly was meant by quantitative easing. And it's a very good example of wrapping up policy in shiny language to ensure it's not understood by the populace, because actually what's happening underneath is not something which the large masses of society would want to happen. It's bad economic decision making. So theme number one for us to consider as we're moving through this conference is, in order to build trust across society, language is important. We have to open up the debate so that all members of society are able to access the economic thinking behind economic decision making. The second theme, which I'd like to put in front of you, is contrast. What do we have and what could we have? To actively consider this is a motivator that will drive society step by step towards pushing for a humane economy. Today, after decades of so-called expert economic policy making, research institutes, large budgets to develop economic policy, we're in a world where the bottom 80% of the human population owns less than 6% of world wealth. And at the same time, the top 1% of the population owns 43% of world wealth. Those numbers are a bit hard to digest. Let me break it down to you in a different manner. That means 300 people on the earth have the same wealth as the poorest 3 billion people. Now, if we just ponder that for a second, what is the contrast that we're looking for? Imagine where we are now and what we could achieve. We could achieve a world where no one on the planet is below the poverty line. We could achieve a world where the welfare of each individual in society is a collective responsibility, is one where people themselves are looking to look after their neighbor, etc., etc. And this is not just wishful thinking, but we've seen this in history before. If we take the example of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, we see that under his governorship, within 2.5 years, a situation was reached where no one was below that poverty line. Just 2.5 years. So this is definitely something which is possible. And when we contrast what we have with what is possible, this will motivate segments of society stage by stage to push and aim and work towards this humane economy. The last theme I want to leave you with, and in my humble opinion, the most important theme, is purpose. Because when you step into a basic economic class, as we all did some time ago, and you're introduced to the subject of economics, it's described as how will we allocate scarce resources to unlimited ones. And the definition of the field of discussion of economics kind of ends there. But there's a much bigger question which has not been addressed. And that is, we're allocating scarce resources to unlimited ones. But with what purpose? What is the purpose behind the allocation of resources? If I were to say to you that I'm offering you a purpose, which is that we will grow the economy so that the rich become richer and the poor become poorer, is that a purpose you would accept? If I was to say to you that the purpose behind the economy at this stage is to ensure that those alive on the planet today enjoy the highest standard of living at the detriment of our grandchildren, who will therefore suffer due to climate change or other reasons, drought and difficulty, is this a purpose that you would accept? So purpose is an integral part of economic thinking and decision making. It can't be separated from it. And what has been the issue over the past few decades is that this conversation around purpose has been sidelined. And that's why I'm so excited about the conference we're in today, because the humane economy is all about purpose. It's all about reconsidering what the purpose behind our economy is. And unfortunately, over the past few decades, we could, in the limited time we have, I can't get into detail, but we could summarize the purpose behind economic development in a single word, an unfortunate word, which is greed. Because when we look at the definition in the Cambridge Dictionary of greed, it reads as a very strong wish to continuously get more of something, especially food or money. And when we look at comparisons between countries now, it's not uncommon to hear that country A is better than country B because it has a higher GDP, it has more wealth, it has more earnings, it has more growth. But this is a very strange way to measure value. It's a very strange way to measure value. And to bring that point home, imagine if two people walked into a room, person A and person B, and we said person A is better than person B because they have more wealth. You know, that wouldn't go down well. That wouldn't be seen as a sensible measure of value, because we see that there's lots of people who have wealth. The Epstein affair will still be fresh in many people's minds. They have wealth, but they use the wealth to abuse others. This is not called humane. This is not called good character. This is not something which we would aspire towards. And in a similar fashion, growth for the sake of growth at a macro level, at a country level, is not something to aspire towards. So the purpose of the humane economy needs to be diverted from greed towards something which is much more humane. And who better to look at for guidance and inspiration than the most humane of all humans, the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What was the central message, the connecting thread, the driving force behind the life of the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. And we have not sent you, O Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but as a mercy for all the worlds. And this mercy was a driving force in all decision makings made by the blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether they were economic decisions or non-economic decisions. The driving force behind them was this concept of mercy. If we can bring this purpose of mercy into economics thinking and decision making, then the humane economy is not a distant aspiration. I leave you with that thought. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. السَّلَامُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَةُ اللَّهِ وَبَرَكَاتُهُ.
Alaikum salam. Thank you very much to Dr. Imran, although he's not with us, for adding his input to the panel. I just make one point. There is this movie, Wall Street, so all the young ones here, Wall Street, many years ago, the main character goes around giving lectures to promote greed. Greed is good, exactly that, yeah? And I always tell in my classes to students, there is no ethical system from the Greeks right up to whatever you have today that ever puts greed as a virtue. Greed is not a virtue, it's a vice. All right, so the lowest virtue you could get is self-interest. Probably self-interest is a virtue, but selfishness, greed is a virtue. Selfishness would be a vice. So in business, in finance, we are telling people greed is good, but not in economics. Okay, so in economics, and especially the economics that we want to promote, I think we're looking for an alternative. The second point before I call Meenakshi is about when the speaker talked about 80%. It reminded me of a book that I read a long time ago, Zygmunt Bauman, Tourists and Vagabonds. You have a small percentage of the world that are tourists, and you have a big portion of the world that are vagabonds. And I think this is where the discussion on the global south and how the global south can be part of this decision making that we need to have, inclusivity, etc., comes in. So, Meenakshi, the floor is yours.
I think you can't see me. How do I turn this on? Well, I have a handicap, I'm short. So I have to be equitable, and therefore I'll sit. Thank you very much to the organizers. In 8 minutes, I'm supposed to talk about the Global South, an impossible mission, but I'll try. I think what's critical is that all the panel members, and I think Professor Jafar, am I getting your name right? Yeah. One thing I must congratulate you on is to name the system on its head. Many people are afraid to talk about the capitalistic system. They don't even want to mention it. And I'm happy that you mentioned it. And of course, there's another, which is the extension of that is neoliberalism, and how the capitalistic system and neoliberalism have actually, it's a design. So if we talk about inequality, I think this previous speaker talked about the inequality. This morning, I woke up to a new UN report on world hunger. 1 in 3 people in the world, 1 in 3 cannot afford a healthy diet. Shocking, absolutely shocking. And a world where Mr. Donald Trump, and we cannot leave this hall without talking about the nakedness of the current order, the bombs, the genocide, the violation of international law, and the horror that we are witnessing. And then so transactional that you want to take over every resource, rare earths from Malaysia, critical minerals from Greenland, the occupation, the lifting up of a president from Venezuela. Everything is now turned upside down. And that naked emperor, I think we have to congratulate ourselves. And therefore, we in the Third World Network, with the Consumers Association of Penang, with Friends of the Earth Malaysia, and I must acknowledge 2 of our great visionaries, Hassan Muhammad Idris and Martin Kaur, who long before we talked about the humane economy have been talking about exactly these things. And the first thing we need to do is to decolonize our universities. And many of our academicians go to Chicago School and come back. And then they try green capitalism. Today we will have some ESG, tomorrow we'll have something else. But again, it's really, is it changing or is it just greening on the side?
So in order to do the impossible, we really need to get to the root of the design, and we need to understand what the design is. And then the first understanding of what design is to look at who is designing the rules of the global economy. If you look at the trade agreements, and this is where the Third World Network has looked at, the World Trade Organization, the trade agreements, the intellectual property rights agreement that Professor mentioned. Today you have the Malaysian Intellectual Property Organization where IPRs are sacrosanct. You cannot challenge. You cannot talk about anything outside the intellectual property regime. And so those of us who saw the COVID pandemic, where the world was dying, where millions of people were dying, big pharma riding on intellectual property would not sell medicines at a cheap price. Affordability to healthcare is not possible because of patented medicines. So what do? You have to get rid of IPRs. How do you do that? You have to engage, you have to fight, you have to call for a dismantling of the intellectual property rights regime. Now talk about that, they will say you are a heretic. They'll say that you are a lunatic. They say you are a fanatic. You cannot do all this. But this is the challenge we must be up against. Another very important aspect is called the investor-state dispute mechanism. Today it has gained a lot of importance. We've been talking about this for at least the last 20 years or so. What is this investor-state dispute settlement mechanism? Do you know about this, Professor Mahendra? Yes, thank you. Thank God people do know. What does it do? These are in your free trade agreements where it says that a government, when it brings in an investor, and you don't even need to be an investor, you just have a post box and you have your post box registered, that at that particular time, the investor comes in, the laws can never be changed. And if you change the laws, what they call the regulatory environment, the government can be sued for billions of dollars. So if your government acts in the interest of healthcare, or because there is a toxic chemical that you're producing, which should be banned because we didn't realize it before, but you need to be banned now, or if you think that you want to be climate change friendly and you want to say, I want to move away from fossil fuels, and you therefore say that we have to reduce fossil fuels, and therefore you have to you say, Shell, you cannot do this, or Exxon, you cannot do that, you can be sued for billions of dollars in arbitration. How on earth can you allow corporations to design rules which take away the rights of governments to do what is good for health and the environment and for sustainability? How did we allow that? Now, how many of you in this room realize that our government's policy making, I'm not talking about Malaysia alone, I'm talking about world over, international policy making by the corporations under this capitalistic neoliberal agenda was to precisely control and take away our policy space and surrender it to the global elite and the global corporates. And now you look at the data centers, the rush on the data centers. Big FDI is foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, as Professor Mahendra knows, is God. You don't screen. Are they doing good? Are they doing bad? Data centers, are they good? Artificial intelligence, good? Is it bad? No. So we look at the money. So people are talking about going beyond GDP. Stop looking at the GDP. Are you producing more drugs? Are you having more drugs in the sense of narcotics? Are you having more alcohol in your society? Are you having more people with cars and therefore is that good? No. So beyond GDP, they talk about values and so on. But beyond that, going to the designing of these rules, which we need to undesign, this is where the global south needs to wake up. And they are waking up, but they're not waking up fast enough. And for them, for our leaders, if I look around the world and I say, where are the global leaders? Very hard to find them. And when Donald Trump, with his reciprocal trade agreements, the weaponizing of tariffs, what did the global south do? Did we get together and say no to him? We didn't. We all signed. The agreement on reciprocal tariffs was everything but reciprocal. It was one-sided. It was U.S. interest. You surrender your interest to the U.S. So this is, neo-colonialism all over again. But, and I told you I can go on and on. I'm not even talking climate change. Maybe that I'll end on climate change. There was this agreement. This is Rio, 1992. Many of us here in the hall probably know about that. The World UN Conference on Climate and Development. The biggest thing that came out of that was the recognition that climate change is going to hit. This was 1992. And then if you look at the treaty, the climate change treaty, one of the first principles is equity. There has to be equity. And they talked about historical responsibility, what we would say reparations in today's framing. Historical responsibility of the developed world for the historical emissions which are causing the climate crisis today. And then they talk about 1.5 degrees centigrade cannot be, from pre-industrial level, should not be breached. We are already crossing. Now, that agreement that Donald Trump's walked away from. And more of the northern governments are also walking away from. The ESG agenda has gone on the back burner. And what has happened? They are expanding fossil fuels and they are going into arms and warfare and all the emissions that come out of that. So we are in a terrible world. And for the young here, there are lots of huge movements which are fighting. So one of the big things that we need to recognize and realize is that those good agreements need to be honored. And this is where the Global South gets together, holds the Global North accountable, and then does its alternatives. I don't like to call the alternatives, because those transformative alternative systems should become the mainstream. And there are models of that, like the Islamic economics or like the other forms of economics, the indigenous people's wisdom, the farmers' wisdom. There's a lot of that. It's not mumbo jumbo. They know how to live with nature. And this is where I think we need to rediscover and resurrect, and we need to transform. So I would actually say reclaiming humanity requires reclaiming power, and that is reclaiming the people power. And we have to be in the front of it, and we have to continue to do it. So thank you so much. I can still go on, but I'm sure we'll have many more occasions to do that.
Thank you very much, Meenakshi. One not fun fact. I was listening to this YouTube and they were saying that the average ticket for the recently completed World Cup was 10,000 US dollars. And I couldn't believe that fact. Okay, and if we see the stadiums were full and there were 50,000 people or 30,000 people, but the average is 10,000 USD. Can you imagine what the big tickets would have cost? That tells you this 80-20 or maybe 90-10 society that we are living in. The second point mentioned, greenwashing, Sharia washing, whatever term we want to use, is a major issue. We have these so-called alternatives that are being put forward, but they are also stuck in the same framework. So while we've got a question there, but maybe I ask the panelists a very quick response. How do we introduce the reforms that we need? We are in this one system, whether you are trying to work within the system or you want to work outside the system. I would think both can go together or should go together, because it's not going to be possible for you to just work outside the system. How would we do it if we could get just a quick response from each panelist? How do we do these reforms that would move towards this change that we want to see, knowing the challenges that we face? Just one quick suggestion that you think we should have.
Yeah, it has to be a multi-level. It has to be a multi-sectoral. It's a difficult work, getting everybody on board with the right mind. And I think the way to do it is to reorganize ourselves. And that needs leadership, stewardship, that needs a lot of organizing. So my proposal, we have to do it at all levels, from the top down to the top. It's going to be complex, but I think, as Professor did mention, there's a wholesome approach. Getting people not only to participate, but to have a meaningful participation, not just getting people come and talk, no, really making that impact. Thank you.
Thank you. You probably would have heard this term called whole of government or whole of governance, right? But what we have is holes in the government, holes in the governance. So it comes back to, in a lot of our own work that we show empirically, that the 8I ecosystem analysis, the one factor that drives everything is institutional leadership. If you don't have the right leadership, whether it's a corporation or country, you will not move. So when we say CEO, the small CEO is Chief Executive Officer, but I think before they become that, they have to be Chief Enlightened Officer. They need to be enlightened about the values and the mindset to be able to drive this change. If the leaders don't get it, I'm sorry, it ain't gonna happen.
Well, I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think there's a lot of knowledge out there, lots of best practices out there, lots of all those activities that young people can do, and what teachers can do. There's so much of material, but I'm not sure what you all are teaching in school. So I really need to challenge the fact that if we want to talk about the different kind of challenging the existing model itself, are we teaching differently from mainstream? So that's why I started by talking about decolonizing our universities so that we do have different ideas. And of course, educate, agitate. We cannot just go back to normal. This is one of our problems. We come together, we are very happy. Tomorrow I walk out and somebody will say, thank you, Meena, for what you said. Then what do you do? What do we do? So each one of us have to go out and say, what can we do and how do we actually be the agents of change? I think that is what I would say, and we have to rise up. It's not going to change, not just the CEO, but everyone.
Thank you very much. Meaningful participation, it has to include everyone, and there is a need for a change of values that we have. Now, in a country like Malaysia, that has a plural community, this becomes a major challenge. Not only among the ethnic groups, religious groups, but even within. As I'm sure Tuan Haji will know when he chairs the Majlis Perundingan Pertubuhan Islam, it's not easy even within your Muslim organizations to come to agreement. So it's a major challenge. But I do believe if Malaysia can do it, this would be an incredible benchmark to set for everyone else. Okay, so thank you very much. There was a question, or while we are waiting for that, is there anybody who would like to ask? Okay, we have, please. Can somebody here?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much to all the speakers. I'm quite intrigued by the title itself, One Economy and Many Voices. One economy, yes, but it's a very fragmented one, where you have the global elites, the first trillionaire, in fact, Elon Musk, who are now having that much of wealth that the rest of us suffers. And many voices imply that there are many actors, and yet also there are certain voices overwhelming and drowning other voices. And that all alludes to the power differentials that Meena was asking earlier, or mentioning earlier. And I want to ask Meena, and I like the points that with this whole power differentials and huge imbalances of power, you talk about the need to return the power back to the people. What does that mean in the national context? Are we talking about reaffirming our sovereignty? And in the international context, are we reasserting back multilateralism as the way forward?
Can I just get, is there one more question for any other speaker? Anyone else? If not, okay, please, Meena.
Thank you, Imran from Citizens International. You did not introduce yourself, so I'm introducing you to the audience. No, the question about what do we do in terms of the national level? Maybe the first thing I want to lament about, since we are all in election mode, that this country, after 69 years, we still are race-based politics and not class-based politics. It's unfortunate. We blame the race rather than looking at the class. Doesn't matter whether you're Malay, Indian, and Chinese, or Orang Asli, or line. You don't look at it from the perspective of the rich elite versus the larger number. So that's my first concern. And race-based politics continue to blind us. We're not talking about the kind of things that we ought to be talking about. Who's causing these problems? What are the real options for solution? So number one, huge challenge for us. So nationally, of course, there's a lot of work that many of us are doing and we continue to do. But I think one critical piece of work is actually the Global South. Where is the voice of the Global South? We talk about the basic, the Brazils, the South Africa, India, China, but even within them, you see a lot of disunity. You look at what's going on in India, I mean, God, we can have a whole day discussion, it's horrible. When you have, I know I'm going to be sanctioned for saying this, but I don't care. I mean, you have Narendra Modi going to Israel and hugging Netanyahu. I mean, I'm sure Nehru and Gandhi and everybody else will be squirming in the grave if they are there. It's unbelievable. So the point is really, where is the Global South? And I think there is the question about China, and there's a lot to learn from China. So I do think that the Global South has to rise. And even at least I work on the climate side of things in the Framework Agreement on Climate Change. There is a strong Global South there, defending common but differentiated responsibility. There's a lot of push on the accountability of the Global North. So unless we get our act together at the national level and together at the global level, we can't confront this alone. So this is why, but citizens are confronting. Everywhere, citizens are waking up. Now, maybe there's the final point I would say. I'm very excited by what's happening in the United States. I talked about Donald Trump. That's because you can focus on something that is really unbelievable. But look at Zoran Mamdani and what he's doing in New York and the Big Apple. So much of excitement around that. And then in the Democratic Party, the big fight with all these progressive forces in there. It's great. But in the Big Apple, in the land of capitalism, you have a huge rise challenging that. And of course, even the big conversations about not supporting Israel. This is fantastic. So I think it needs to grow, it needs to widen, and we all need to do a lot more. I keep saying the same thing, but I think it's something that it's fascinating. And this is the moment. Maybe I will end by saying everybody has said the old order is dying, the new order is waiting to be born, and I think it's about time we seized it and give rise to the new order. Thank you.
Hopefully, in building the new order, we don't get the new old order. Then we are in trouble, huh? And sometimes this is happening everywhere. Just mentioning a little bit more, in the 90s, the WTO was the darling of everything. And I remember there were lots of discussions, and even some people were arguing that multilateral is the way to go. What we have seen in the last 15, 20 years, when the Global South was getting its act together, then there was pushback. So now you have unilateral decisions being made, right? So what has happened to that, that idea of Global South getting together? Maybe, Prof?
Sure. I think I want to take that question with the Global South, because it's a very important point that, the world is held hijacked by one person, right? Or one country. But here in this part of the world, we have a very important community called the ASEAN community. We are 700 million people, right? And if ASEAN could come back collectively to say, look, we are going to look after us first, in terms of economic development, in terms of, the Global South is fantastic, but it's really complex, right? But at least at home, we have ASEAN. Last year, Malaysia was the chair of ASEAN. and there's a study that came out, what would ASEAN's future be? It has to be a collective prosperity. It's not about profitability, it's about prosperity. It's about values of what ASEAN cherish, which means that it has to look at its environment, because the future is going to be biodiversity and renewable energy, which ASEAN has. It's about people. ASEAN has a lot of young talent, people. Number three is actually ASEAN collectively has a huge growing market. Somehow we are distracted. And I think if the leaders could come together and see this, you don't have to be antagonizing anybody, but at least look of developing ourselves to become. And if we did that, you'd start seeing investments coming in from China, like how everybody wants to come. And, so again, I think our focus in the next 5 to 10 years should be a collective prosperity ASEAN. And I think Malaysia can contribute to that discussion.
Thank you very much, Tuan Haji. Before you go, I just want to go, language is important, what was mentioned by Dr. Imran. And, we used to have a policy document previously called Wawasan Kemakmuran Bersama, is it? What was it during Tan Sri Mahyudin's time? And I remember we had this discussion in the university, and we were not happy with the use of the word makmur, because it gives basically a very material view, makmur. Compare that with what we have, I think now, kesejahteraan, which has a much wider meaning of prosperity. So in English you have prosperity, but in Malay there are two different words that have a big difference. Tuan Haji, your comments?
That question, it reflects me a lot. Last week I was in Tehran and I witnessed the biggest funeral ceremony. It was about 50 million people. It amazed me that, that kind of reflection of a unity that we can make the change. The symbol of that funeral of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was his fist. When he was bombed, the only part of the body that was retrieved was this thing, and he was in clench, giving the signal that, you have to fight and you have to rise up. And exactly what Mina is being repeatedly telling us, this resistance and defining your enemy is very important, and we cannot have a language that is softened to be more democratic, diplomatic, and all that. It has to be very clear. You have the Epstein group ruling the country. I mean, you have this guy. I hate even mentioning his name. It's so disgusting. But yet, yes, we have to define who is the enemy. And therefore, this question of how does the international community can resist, it has to be done throughout the world. That's why I have a different term of global south. I call it the global majority. It's the people, right? Now we are isolating these few people and against of people within America. And outside America, the whole world, the people are going to the streets by the millions. I mean, we have that potential. It's just organizing ourselves. So I think if the question is how do we fight against this tyranny of this, person or the power that is trying to control us, we just have to tell the people and to actually, exposed that, and countries who are lining up with them has to be directly confronted. The governments, the leaders, we have to tell them that you are doing wrong. You are in complicity with this tyranny of the world.
Thank you very much, Tuan Haji. Mina, I'm sorry I got yellow card and then dark yellow card. The red card hasn't come out yet. Yeah. Okay, just 30 seconds. That's what a small point
No, I'm
is.
taking an issue with the question, the earlier question.
Yeah.
You blamed Iran as the problem. Iran is not the problem. And I think that whoever asked the question, I'd like to have a discussion outside. Because blaming Iran for what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz is the wrong question.
But I don't think the question said Iran. It just said one party, right? So it was just one party. We don't know who that one party is, right? So you could have a discussion on which Who is the one party? All right, thank you very much. We have got our 75 minutes. Thank you very much. We got the extra time from the organizers. Firstly, please, let's give a word of appreciation to all the speakers. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing the further discussions today and tomorrow. It just leaves me to thank everyone for giving your attention and the questions from the audience. Thank you very much. I hand it back to the Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Professor Aslam, and the rest of the speakers for that thought-provoking session. And we'd like to invite moderator and speakers to please stand forward for a group photo, please. Ladies and gentlemen, the dialogue just now reminds us that a resilient economy is built not only by numbers alone, but through trust, inclusivity, and collective voices. And when every stakeholder has a role, we move closer towards an economy that serves humanity and creates shared prosperity, and that is what Malaysia needs. Again, let us give a round of applause to our moderator and speakers. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, for every unanswered questions due to the limitation of time, you are free to reach out to any of the speakers later. Ladies and gentlemen, after this, we'll be having our breakout sessions across 3 parallel tracks. Here in this hall, we will continue with track 1 on Youth Forum. And if you are interested in business and finance, head across the hall to the Kedah Johor room for track 2. For discussions on community and social impact, make your way to Tun Hussein on Hall B next door for track 3. And after the lunch break, we will reconvene for the second breakout session, featuring 2 exciting parallel sessions. And here in this hall, we'll be hosting the plenary HEGD conversation on human economy in action. Meanwhile, in Tun Hussein on Hall B next door, we will host the HEGD Ideas Lab, and that is after lunch. You may now proceed to your preferred breakout track. Please register your attendance and enjoy the sessions. Thank you.